We're going to talk a little bit about the GPU market in general and then zoom into Celium, how we started, and why you should use Celium. The GPU as a service market is a multi-billion-dollar market with a massive growth rate over the last few years and expected over the next few years as well. It's expected to do in growth rate over the next less than 10 years and 8 years here. Same thing with the total GPU hardware, total addressable market. I mean, we've all seen in the news that like XAI, Meta, Grok, they're buying these massive data centers with hundreds of thousands of GPUs, H100s, and tens of billions of dollars in investment just for these GPUs. And Nvidia has a market cap of $3 trillion, which is insane. It's more than the entire GDP of Italy, actually. All of these big companies are investing heavily in GPUs because, as people are predicting, pretty much everything will be running on AI soon. And large language models are, I use LLMs for pretty much everything in my daily work, and I think most people here in this call do too. It's becoming incredibly useful, and all these big companies are investing heavily into it. But the thing is that not everybody has these tens of billions of dollars to invest into large data centers. For the typical person who wants to rent GPUs, they can invest hundreds of thousands of dollars into GPU infrastructure, a data center, land, electricity, security, technicians, maintenance, cleaning. We see here in this analysis that just the variable costs of owning a hardware, a data center for H100s is equal to the 5-year cost of renting the H100. So this is where Celium comes in, is for the people who don't have billions of dollars to spend on data centers, is that they can easily rent GPUs within minutes, any type of GPU that they want, and it all goes through Subnet 51. So a little bit of background, as some of you all already know, I used to be a big miner on bittensor, and I used to work a lot with back in the day, back when bittensor first started. It was a lot of LLM inferencing, and that was actually what the first subnet was. It was provide the next token by running this LLM, and it would check your log probs of the LLM. Actually, I mean, there's some subnets that still do this, like subnet 19. Subnet 1 just added a log probs check. But what this required was a large amount of GPUs to do the inferencing. And we still see this across also subnet 4, subnet 19, subnet 64. They're doing billions and billions of tokens on OpenRouter and inferencing. And it's becoming a huge part of the GPU market is LLMs and running the LLMs. And when I was doing this on a large scale, I was having to bounce across multiple different providers, with each provider having their different benefits, their pros and cons, in different agreements. And I was having to spend a bunch of calls, time on sales calls, trying to negotiate different rates. And with my experience in both bittensor and GPUs, I figured that it would be the perfect place to launch a new cloud compute company on bittensor, because I thought that with my experience, I could make it into a place where we were incentivizing only the best GPUs and what people wanted, into a comprehensive platform that provided a valuable service by utilizing the valuable bittensor miners. But we faced a lot of problems along the way. As I said at the beginning, it's been 6 months since we started. And I mean, the miners are pretty brutal, as any subnet owner already knows. So we ran into a bunch of exploits and hacks that the miners were trying to do to overcome our incentive mechanism and access the Tau, or now the Subnet 51 token, in order for illegitimate, but they're illegitimately doing the work. For example, the first thing we did to try to verify what GPUs the miners had was check the NVIDIA libraries. But then they were adding hooks to the NVIDIA libraries saying they had H100s when they actually had 4090s or a different type of GPU. But we've drastically improved the security of our GPU verification method, actually doing something pretty similar to what Subnet 64 is doing now, with matrix multiplications and checking both the speed and the capacity of the GPU by seeing how large of a matrix operation they can do and checking their flops. And so it doesn't really matter what they say they have. We actually just check the true GPU performance now. And then we can pretty much 100% accurately determine what type of GPU it's actually running on based on these metrics. Additionally, what miners were doing, we're creating multiple mining containers on the same GPU. We have a couple of checks for that now to ensure it's not possible to do, which is checking the NVIDIA UUID, and we check all of the containers on the machine. Not only that, we check for GPU utilization outside of the container, especially if it's being rented. We check to make sure the GPU owner cannot be using the GPU while it's being rented out to someone else. Miners were sending their tests to a proxy machine, and we implemented a solution to make it so that proxying isn't possible with SSH interactive shells. And we see some other exploits that miners figured out and how we solve them. It's been a long process, but these solutions that we came up with are pretty robust now, and it's incredible improvement every single day on Subnet 51. And I mean, I remember just like 2 months ago, I was telling people, like, they were asking me, hey, should I use Celium? Should I transfer my workload to Celium? And I was like, yeah, I don't know. It's a bit unstable. But then every single time they'd check in, I was like, yeah, we just made massive improvements recently. It's much more stable now. It's much more reliable. Now miners can't exploit this way or this way. And that's continuing to happen. But we're at a pretty stable point now within just 6 months where we figured out a way to sort of contain the miners and make them really work for us, which is the goal of a bittensor subnet. Because they're a huge advantage to the platform if we can accomplish that and make them work for us. So same thing on the front end side. The things the miners were doing were affecting the front end performance for renters and users of our platform. And we've in the same manner, we've come up with unique ways to sort of push the miners in the direction that we want to have a valuable product. What we recently started doing was dynamically changing the GPU incentive based on the GPU rental rate of each GPU. So, for example, if we see that what happened recently is we had some people with 40 data centers of a bunch of 4090s that were adding hundreds and hundreds of GPUs, but we didn't quite see the demand for those GPUs. And at the same time, there was probably only 50 H200s and tens of BU200s, and all of those were getting rented out. So what we did was we increased the incentive for H200s and B200s, and we decreased the incentive for 4090. And we can programmatically adjust these incentive percentages so that we always have an extra supply of each GPU type, while at the same time a rental rate that's healthy, so that we're not completely renting out all of one GPU type, and they're not all going unrented either. So it's a balance of maintaining the price of the GPU and the incentive that we give to the miners for supplying those GPUs. And we can change this very dynamically and quickly. And then the great thing about bittensor is that the miners adapt super quickly. So if we make one specific GPU like plus 50% incentive, within hours, we can see more of that GPU type come online. This was a huge thing that we just discovered actually within the last week. I'm super proud of our team for doing this. But a huge issue with some of our competitors like Vast or RunPod is you can't actually run Docker containers inside the rental machines because you're in a container when you rent it. But we just started rolling this out today, and I posted a demo on my Twitter, where now with it, actually any custom template, you can run your own Docker containers in addition to you being in a container yourself. So it's full Docker and Docker compatibility. You can now run, for example, subtensor in Docker inside your GPU, whereas you couldn't have done that before. We're really striving to provide full bare metal like access to all of the GPUs with as high of uptime as possible and high reliability. These are some other quality of life things we added, like you can now reboot the pod from the front end. You can add other SSH keys from the UI. We created docs for custom template creation, which automatically goes through a verification process on our backend, so people aren't what was happening is that they were creating template scripts that didn't actually start up because either they didn't have SSH access to the GPU, because they didn't include a SSH server inside their template or things like that. So we automatically append an SSH server, and then we automatically verify all the templates to make sure they're runnable, to make it as easy as possible for users who want to create their own custom environment. Another thing that I'm really happy with is that the entire Celium workflow can be done programmatically through an API now. Actually, huge shout out to Distributed Tensor, who created a CLI for Celium, where you can rent see all pods, delete your pods all from a CLI. But we're also coming out with this on our end. I mean, we have API docs now, but we're coming out with better tooling, like a Kubernetes-like setup, where you can set a config and automatically check for pods that fit your specific standards that you need. Like if you need 80 gigabytes of VRAM, you can set that in a config and automatically keep 16 GPUs, or some amount of GPUs with specific metrics at all times, without ever having to go to the UI if you prefer a developer-like environment. So yeah, we've made all of these improvements, which lead to our numbers today, which is about $7,000 per day in rentals, and you can see these huge growth numbers as we become more stable. I expect it to continue growing at this rate, as we're constantly adding new features and improvements daily, and increasing the reliability and uptime of the machines, with about 500 unique users right now. And this is all within just 6 months of starting the subnet on bittensor. So I'm really happy with these results, and yeah, I expect it to keep improving pretty rapidly. Why Celium, and why does bittensor fit into Celium? Why do we need bittensor, and basically why does our platform have a competitive advantage? The best part of bittensor and our biggest competitive advantage, in my opinion, is our onboarding process for GPU providers. We completely automate everything. We have no KYC, no vendor lock-in. We don't have any sort of contracts that the GPU providers have to sign or agree to. Like we have some competitors where you have to lock in your GPUs to that platform for up to a year or more, which gives you very little flexibility with what you can do with your GPUs. And I mean, I'll go into this a bit later, but VAST and RunPad have some pretty crazy things on their terms and conditions that the providers have to sign. Whereas for us, it's completely permissionless, and we don't care who you are, we don't care where you are, but as long as you have a GPU that has a high quality and that's in demand, you'll be rewarded for adding that to our platform. In addition to an extra bonus if your machine gets rented out. What this means for the renters and the users of our platform is that when we have access to a greater percentage of the population of GPU owners, this means that we can provide the GPUs at a lower cost because we have access to people in jurisdictions that might not be otherwise allowed to provide their GPUs to other platforms, who might not be comfortable with the strict terms and conditions of other platforms. They can add their GPU within minutes to Celium without any sort of agreement, for an automated check and rewards if they have a high quality GPU. So this is the impact for the renter, is that not only do we have more sort of a diverse GPU supply, but we can also offer them at a cheaper price. We're on average about half the price of other GPU providers. and we're striving to be with the same quality as well. Here's a bit of an overview about how fast our onboarding is and how low our fees are compared to other providers. RunPod, for example, takes 24% of the fee. And the great thing about Celium is that we actually provide some proportion of the incentive for just having the GPUs on the platform. So this means that you'll get some small percentage of rewards, even if your GPU doesn't even get rented out at all, just so that we can provide that availability to renters. And on top of that, we do transfers as a proportion of the GPU rental revenue back to the miners themselves in the subnet 51 token. With so what we've seen by being hosted on bittensor with a super dynamic environment and incentivizing miners to provide the latest GPUs is that we actually have access to GPUs before our competitors that just recently came out. For example, Celium had access to 5090s on March, whereas it took other providers up to a month later. It's the same thing with B200s too. We've had B200s for a while now, and for example, VAST still doesn't even have them available on their platform. Here's some things that I found while reviewing the VAST provider agreement is basically they can charge you any amount equal to sale or taxes. They can also withhold any of your payments, and they verify machines irregularly, only about once a week. Whereas we never charge our providers, we never withhold payments. Everything's verifiable on chain, and you're verified in minutes. And RunPod has requirements like 24/7 on-site security, physical access to servers must be tracked, logs submitted to them. You must disclose all of these things, have a comprehensive setup, and it's tons of hoops that you have to go through and barriers to entry. Whereas for us, like I said earlier, it's just a super easy process done in minutes. The only requirement is the hardware that you have, and that's all automated and done super quickly and easily. So yeah, like I said, we have a huge wide variety of GPUs, but not only GPUs, we've been spending a lot of work over the last month or so on making custom deployment options with services such as LLM generators, image generators, video generators, where people can just click the template option and automatically have access to either an image generator or whatever it is. I posted a demo video on my X account where it's within 1 minute. Basically, you just click the image generator template option. You don't even need to ever SSH into the machine. You just open the external IPs service, and then you can automatically access the image generator UI. I can actually quickly show that I have it still running. So this is the template that we provided. You don't need to SSH in. You just take this external IPN port, image creator, video creator, and I was just testing with a fish, but you can just start creating images right away without needing to be any technical at all or any code at all. Same thing with custom templates. It doesn't even have to be what we provide, but you can create your environment that's completely customized to you with your own packages. You can host it on Docker Hub with your own environment variables, your own ports exposed, and make this public or private for other people to use in the README with instructions on how to use it. And everything will be downloaded and installed for you automatically. We have detailed metrics and dashboards, not only just this image, but other ones where you can monitor the usage of your GPU. If you don't want to go into the GPU itself, we show the usage on the front end, the utilization of all the GPUs, so you can optimize, for example, your cost and your monitoring system, all from the front end itself. We have SSH key management, where you can go to your pods and add or remove SSH keys straight from the UI. We have flexible payments in crypto and fiat with auto top-up functionality, so you don't have to worry about this. We make it easy to onboard for the customers too. We don't have like specific verifications on what sort of payment you use. Additionally, with Stripe, we can provide you with the ability to pay in actually any sort of currency you want through Stripe. And we're open to adding any sort of other payment options as well. Our goal is to make it as easy as possible for both the providers and the users to use our platform. This is actually coming out tomorrow with uptime trackers and reliability, not only for your pods, but for all of the available pods. So you can, before renting it, know if if that specific GPU has a high track record of successful rentals. And not only here, we actually have a database that's public now where you can go to any miner cold key and search for all of their rental history. It shows the day that it was rented, what was rented, when it was rented. If it was a successful rental, meaning it was 100% uptime all the way through the entire duration of the rental. And that's on our homepage at the very bottom. So yeah, we have added tons of features, way more than I could have expected that we could have accomplished in 6 months, and a pretty stable platform all within 6 months. But there's a lot more to come. We're still, in my opinion, the cheapest and best quality in terms of value for what you're paying for cloud compute platform. And yeah, you can try it out today. And we've just enabled $5 of free runtime today for this call, for this presentation. I mean, yeah, that's pretty much it. I can go to any questions now.
Why don't you demo renting a machine on Celium?
Yeah,
give us
sure.
some B200 or whatever they're called.
Actually, with the B200s here, let me show you. Here's our current stats of what we have available and what we have rented. We were specifically looking at these numbers to determine how we should determine the rental incentive for each GPU type. With the B200s and H200s, it's really hard to find providers, and we've been consistently increasing the incentive for those providers, but we need to keep increasing it in order to get more of that GPU type. We're hoping to make this completely automated and dynamic so that the incentive will increase 1 or 2% like every minute or hour based on demand and supply. But so yeah, I rented this 8x A100 with the image generator. You can do this all in one click. We can start again from the beginning. Basically, it doesn't really matter what type, but let's just pick an A100. This was the image generator template we created. This doesn't even honestly matter because you don't need to ever go into the machine. What happens when you deploy it is the miner will give the miner the container information. The miner will automatically start downloading it. I just logged myself out. And then it will run the container for you. So you can see the logs here of what the miner did. It pulled the container, it ran the container, it added your SSH key. This part isn't necessary for this container, but then you can go to this IP and port to automatically use the service. That's here, which has a video generator and image creator option. But it's not only this. I know, for example, like this is a pretty old template and it doesn't have access to the best image generators. There's much higher quality ones now, I think. This was just something that we spun up quickly as an example.
Do you have one that has a Jupyter notebook sort of front end? That would be valuable.
Jupyter notebook? That's something I don't know actually. That's something that we were looking to add. Sí, está ya. Sí. Sorry, I'm in a public co-working space. In terms of the Jupyter notebook, when you spin up the pod, we're looking to add a Jupyter notebook option where, like you said, you can just pull up a Python environment and you can access the GPU from there, but we don't have that right now.
So a couple of weeks ago, things were not looking good because the miners were pulling off the GPUs and it was really unstable. You tried to rent it, the storage wasn't there. what happened over the last couple weeks that got you to this point?
Yeah, it's been a long process. Um, I had those 2 slides that basically showed all of the minor exploits, and there's some things that are really hard to robustly solve in a way that miners can't get around it. Um, and you basically just have to be very creative as a subnet owner to find something that to find ways to verify specific aspects of the machine where miners can't get around it. And we've done this time and time again. I mean, we have good experience now with this over the last 6 months. And basically any new features that users might want on our platform, I think we can add them pretty quickly now with our experience with what we're adding so far.
Th- The the storage issue though, how was that solved? Like, there's the miners put this thing up. You did it require having verification for all of these different qualities of a machine, the amount of RAM, the amount of storage, the GPU available, the bandwidth?
Yeah, good point. Specifically in terms of storage, um, what we do in our minutes long automated check is we pick a random template option. We pick a random template option from our official templates, and these generally have like 10 to 20 gigabytes of space. But what can happen is that the GPU can also be selected to have to pull an image that might be 100 gigabytes of space. And if they don't have the storage to run that container successfully, they'll get their uptime reset and a score of 0. So it ensures that they have the ability to pull these random things, these random containers that users might request, whether it be like a DeepSeek model or a different LLM. Um, and there's not really any way for them to get around that. So that's our solution for now.
You said that there was an issue at one point where the miners would have a proxy service. So like you have one big, beefy B200 sitting behind a whole bunch of smaller pretending to be machines that are larger. How do you solve that problem? Like that sort of like man in the middle attack.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm not technical enough to know the answer for this one. I was talking to Warris today about how they did it, and he said something about the interactive shell not allowing proxy servers. But not only that, when we run the task on the GPU, we can tell with 100% accuracy what GPU it is based on the size of the matrix they can do a multiplication for, as well as the speed of the multiplication to test their flops and VRAM. So they can't send that off to another server as long as we have interactive SSH shell um, and solve the matrix multiplication at the same time.
So basically, the interactive shell stops you from making a proxy. You can't
That's what
pipe
I've heard
through.
from Warren.
It's a lot
We-
like playing whack-a-mole to make this problem work. And so you've spoken to a lot of providers, and bit of an anecdote. Like when I first met you way back in 2022, I think, um, w- we were on a call talking to GPU providers, and I realized that I was in a conversation with somebody that um, really knew this industry very well. Let's put it that way. They knew you, and they
Yeah,
didn't give a shit. You were, just this kid wants some GPUs. We're going to help him get some GPUs, but they were knew about you way before us. Um, so you've rented a lot of GPUs. Like, how many do you think you've rented?
yeah. I mean, this was on like the background of Celium slide where I basically knew like the CEO of every cloud compute platform personally at that time 2 years ago. I was spending hundreds of thousands a month on the GPUs in order to inference all of the models that bittensor was requiring at that time. It was pretty ridiculous. And yeah, through that process, I noticed a lot of problems and things that can be improved with the current available options. And yeah, I thought it was something I was experienced enough in order to start the next bittensor subnet focused on it.
One of your slides is the cost of a GPU on Celium versus the cost of the same GPU on RunPod. But is that a fair apples to apples comparison? Because the GPU's price on Celium is just the one that you're picking, or is that tied to the actual emission that that miner is getting from that machine?
So the majority of the mission, it's actually only 20% right now, is used to incentivize the GPUs. Um, what we use that emission for is mainly just incentivizing people to add their GPUs to the platform. But it goes two ways, because also for the rental price, that's a bonus for the GPU providers. We send back a percentage of the GPU rental revenue back to the miners. And we can increase or decrease this based on the amount of available GPUs on our platform. The problem with us having all 100% of miner incentive turned on is that what it ended up being was like thousands of GPUs available that weren't being rented. So I thought it was better and a better strategy to basically be able to dynamically control this, to always have some of every GPU type available, but not like hundreds and hundreds of H200s or B200s that weren't actually being used, so that we can make a more sustainable business.
Looking at the prices right now for the token on 51 and the number of GPUs that are there right now, if you turn that nozzle up all the way and expect some equilibrium to be reached in terms of the amount of GPUs based on the price, like how big of a compute provider will Celium be?
We could easily have thousands of H200s on here. Um, but like I said, we're focused more on moving slowly and moving correctly, meaning we need to make sure we have all of the available features that users might want, whether that's custom deployments, our own custom templates, making it easier to do video rendering, all these different services that people use GPUs for, making sure all of those things work and work well before we sort of unleash the full potential of the miners. And in the meantime, it's more just a question of us being sustainable with the emissions that we have allocated to us.
Right now, having solved these problems, like honestly, just leading up to the call in many ways, right? Like last week, there was a lot of instability on the platform that you've sort of stamped out. Are you already seeing an increase or an uptick in users?
Absolutely. Our month over month growth is 124%. And I don't expect that number to decrease over the next month too. We're constantly making improvements, constantly improving the service. And then on top of that, as we make these improvements, we can also increase the miner incentive more for more GPUs and more rentals. So, and then eventually what we do is we use as we increase the GPU incentive, the miner incentive more, we get more rental revenue because we have a higher rental utilization. And with that higher rental revenue, we can send more money back to miners, increasing the GPU supply even further. And essentially it's an uncapped supply at that point. We could be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of GPUs on Celium.
Where does that capital, sorry, at what point does that capital flow back to the token holders? And what's your vision for how that like cycle completes itself?
The capital doesn't need to, in my opinion, the capital doesn't need to flow itself back to the token holders, but the value does. And in our subnet, what the value is the GPUs itself. And we've actually implemented this since many months ago, is that if you have a validator on Celium, you have exclusive access to the GPUs yourself. If you don't want to be renting them out, you can access all of your H200s, H100s, A100s, whatever you need for free. So this is sort of the extrinsic value of our token, is that is the GPUs themselves, is the value to the commodity, and it's all stake weighted. So with a low enough kappa, what basically the way Yuma consensus works is that the the score that each validator gives you is valued in terms of its stake. So the more stake you have, the more access to GPUs you have, and the more value you have. So this is sort of a direct tie to more stake equals more free GPUs, which is the whole value prop of Subnet 51 token.
So
And
you
it's not only this, but we plan on expanding this to not only validators, but just holders of the token too. So if you hold 1% of the supply of the token, we want to give you 1% of the GPUs. And whether you want to use those GPUs yourself or rent them out, that's up to you, right? Because they're your GPUs.
Is there intention to make Celium itself open source so that if I'm a validator and I don't want to use this platform, hypothetically, that's completely possible for me to just, circumvent the Celium front end and build my own brand of incentivized compute on top of
Yeah,
51.
completely, 100%. And you don't even need a front end at all. Right now, when what the validators do is they just give you their public key, and the miners that are allocating their GPUs to that validator, you automatically have SSH access already to all of the miners without even needing a front end at all. But the front end's it's not too complicated to build. Um, as a
What would
validator ourselves in the subnet, that's sort of our value prop. But yeah, absolutely. Anyone, I mean, our competitors even could get a validator in our subnet and access more GPUs and then just tie that into the back end of their services.
I'm looking forward to that being directly integrated into the Celium CLI or whatever CLI Formalized made, so I can just load my wallet keys and all of a sudden I have access to whatever GPUs I want. That would be quite brilliant, right? No API keys at all.
But
Just dash that wallet dot
yeah,
something something.
yeah, that's all always already available. But there's also an option in the Celium front end to just verify your validator key, where you just do a signature of your validator. And as long as you have that, you have access to the percentage of GPUs of your stake.
But
Where
just
you can do that off the Celium.
it would be incredibly ergonomic and beautiful if I could just, pip install something and then just do dash dash wallet my key, and all of a sudden I can see GPUs and pick from them. Is then that's
Yeah.
possible. You don't need to go and talk to Celium's front end. You just need the validator key associated with one of the validators.
Absolutely. Celium's not required at all. It's sort of just an easy front end user interface for people to access the GPUs, especially people not who don't have a validator. But no, as a validator, it's very simple to get direct SSH access to any of the miners, or critically around that.
Where does or what is the relationship between what you are doing and all the buzz these days of TEE and trusted execution environments? Um, I forget what Rob was calling them. There's TEs and there's also another one. Um, Forgive me, I can't remember. But what is the relationship between the verification that you guys are
So
doing
I
and
think you're thinking of confidential compute. NVIDIA's
there you go.
confidential compute makes it so that, but plus TE makes it so that you can run a workload, and the GPU owner does not know at all what you're running. It's completely encrypted. I think this was sort of the idea of Subnet 4, but it's definitely something that we're looking into as well as an incentive boost for those miners who provide that and can completely verify that they can never see any of the information or anything that's happening on their GPU. It would be a huge improvement to our platform, and it's something that we're looking to integrate soon.
So with that integrated, you could get a GPU. You'd know it's private. It's an entrusted enclave. It's verifiably secure, and you know that the CIA isn't snooping.
Exactly. I mean, this is actually already in the works. I've been talking to the CEO of Follow Cloud, who runs a trusted execution environment service, to help us with this.
Beautiful. So you have the CLI, things are running. Who's using Celium right now? Is it bittensor miners? And are you selling in a major way directly back into the bittensor ecosystem?
I think so. I think with the minimal marketing that we're doing now as we're scaling up and making our platform robust, most of the people that know about our platform are within the BitTensor community. And within the BitTensor community, there's a huge demand for GPUs. So whether that's on subnets like 19, we were actually thinking of doing a proof of concept where we set up a miner on 19, using only Celium GPUs, and it's totally possible. And then we could start. I've been talking to some subnet 19 miners to see what they might need and how we can best support them to do that. But yeah, we can absolutely start with people on BitTensor subnets as some of our main consumers before we expand to everyone else.
You could pay people from every subnet to make a template, and just have that template running on the front end of Celium, and one-click miners will be finally a thing.
Absolutely. We've done that. We've done this sort of in the background for 19, working on the VLM templates for each of the models that are being run on 19 as sort of a proof of concept of a one-click miner being deployed on Celium. But it's still in the works, and obviously mining isn't that easy. There's some more optimizations that have to be done, but we're going to come out with all that information as soon as we can.
Very cool. So a little bit about Datura as well. So like, what is Datura?
I guess I was having an issue. I mean, this is the brutally honest background, is that I used to, back when I was mining bittensor, I started wanting to hire people to help me scale. And they were all like, "Who are you? You're just a kid. You have no credibility. You have no company. Why would I work for you? Like, where's your background? What's your funding?" Like all these questions, and it was getting hard to hire really talented developers without a company. And at that point, I already had like maybe 5, 10 employees at the beginning of when I was scaling up. Um, and so eventually, yeah, I came up with Datura. We formed a company. We made everything official. We started hiring people through that company, and basically, our company is just oriented around working in and around the BitTensor ecosystem, providing as much value as we can anywhere we see that it might be needed. With my long experience in BitTensor, there's a lot of places where I see need to potential for new improvements in BitTensor, whether that was us creating Tau market cap. I mean, I never had any expectations of making any money on Tau market cap. It was just something that I thought needed to be done. Whether it's new subnets, whether it's different tools. We were going to come out with a CLE, like a new CLE back when the BT CLE used to be really slow. But
Hey,
Leighton has actually helped a lot with that, coming out with helping with all the open source things in BitTensor. But we are sort of just a BitTensor focused company that doesn't really have any limits within BitTensor, whether it's mining, validating, subnet owning, or open source tools around the ecosystem.
so what other things is Datura and the larger company doing right now?
Um, I've sort of been narrowing my focus down recently. We used, I personally used to be managing a lot of projects myself, with Tau market cap, subnet 18, subnet 22, subnet 51, different subnets that I had partial ownership in, advising them over how to perfect their incentive mechanism and make it more robust. Uh, I've sort of been narrowing my focus down specifically so I can put most of my time into attention into Subnet 51, because it's the product that I'm most excited about and I see the most potential for. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that I've sort of sold off, or stopped working on some of my other previous passions, just to focus on one thing that I think can be really great and has a lot of potential.
Well done. That's it for questions from me, Fish. Why don't we open it up to the rest of the community and see if the people want to come on stage and ask questions, they want to grill you for various reasons. People maybe have other questions about the Datura at large. Maybe in the interim here, can you talk a little bit about burning minor emissions? And there was a large, heated debate for a while inside the BitTensor community and the route channel specifically about burning minor emissions. And I am, as you know, opposed to it on for some philosophical reasons. But I'm really curious to hear your take on like why you think it makes BitTensor subnets more sustainable long term. This
Yeah,
ability to use for you,
and I know we've already talked about this extensively. But the gist of it on the miner side is that we don't need access to tens of thousands of GPUs right now as we're making the product work, especially if it's a non-working product or exploitative product with the miners not providing what they're supposed to provide. I don't think we should be providing 100% emissions to them. And even if it is working, what I think makes more sense is to provide them an amount that is equal to the value that they're creating for us. So we can scale that up and down based on whether our product's working or not, whether we're generating revenue or not. I think 20% is a good medium for now, where we see that we still have access to over 1,000 GPUs, high quality GPUs, and a decent rental utilization rate, but also still available GPUs to rent. I think a sort of tangential point is that I don't think we need many validator missions as well as subnet owner missions, actually. I mean, the subnet owner key on 51 is generating a huge amount of value in tau, which is way more than we need right now. I mean, we're well funded in the first place, but honestly, if it were up to me, I would cut all of them to 20%, because the validators, they already have access to all of the GPUs themselves. Like, that's their form of payment. If they're running a weight copying validator, they don't get access to any GPUs. Their incentive to validate, honestly, is just the value that they get from the commodity. You could honestly cut it down to 0% emission to the validators, and I don't think it would affect the product at all, or anything about it, because there's still higher incentive to validate on this subnet than any other subnet that doesn't provide a commodity to the validators. Eventually, I see that as a more sustainable goal for making a working version of Yuma consensus, rather than trying to force them to always to honestly validate. I mean, it's essentially a incentive mechanism problem, like what you're doing with Yuma consensus, and Ref knows a lot about this. But it will always be possible to like look on the chain and then set weights that way, as a weight copier. But the biggest incentive to not weight copy is financial or value based. So if I have access to a bunch of H100s, H200s, in exchange for running a validator on 51, which is honestly just a small CPU server, and in the history of our subnet, we have not had a single problem with a validator ever having to do a manual intervention. I think Roundtable can testify to this. We're probably one of the most stable subnets for validators. They've never had to come to us with any issues. It's just a one-time start for a validator that automatically gives you access to your share of GPUs. But yeah, it would be cool if we had access on the owner side and validator side to adjust the emissions, as I don't think miners are the only ones that are being overpaid right now. But yeah, I definitely think it makes it more sustainable, as it eliminates unnecessary dilution.
You've claimed that weight copying is not a problem on 51. Why is that? How is that? And what's the evidence?
My perspective is that I much rather people weight copy on subnet 51 than validate, because that just means I have access to more GPUs for free. Like I said, there's no reason for miners to allocate GPUs to weight copying validators, because that won't affect their weights, because their weights are only being created based on the weights of the honest validators. So this means that, I mean, if I have access to $10 million, $15 million worth of hardware just for running a CPU that costs $200 a month, $100 a month, I'll absolutely take that deal any day. And I mean, this is really the true incentive to solving weight copying, in my opinion. But no, weight copying is no problem, because sure, they're just copying my weights. They're effectively just adding more stake weight to the honest validators.
So,
Uh,
good image in the chat. Which validators on bittensor use compute from Celium?
I don't think any of them use compute from Celium right now. We've gone through a lot in every single week. We have sort of huge improvements that we're making to the system, but I don't actually think it will happen until in order for a validator to validate and set weights, they need to put their hotkey on that server. And I think a lot of validators will have concerns about not using their own hardware and using another GPU. I mean, a GPU server that they don't own, and putting a sort of sensitive information on there. Right now, it's best for sort of just inferencing and training, where the information is not incredibly valuable that it would matter a lot if somebody stole that information, just because it is possible, as it's possible with any cloud compute provider that doesn't have confidential compute. But so that's a reason it's a high priority for us, so we can help sort of get that flywheel going as soon as possible to expand our addressable market to people that require privacy and encrypted data.
So how would you approach the problem here of a validator that doesn't want to see their keys lost?
We just need to make it so that the container contents are encrypted, which is the goal of confidential compute and TE. Um, and it's pretty easy to verify that. We just need to add this into the incentive mechanism. It's not a complicated workflow for us to add this to 751, and we'll be able to access a large amount of more potential renters once we have this capability.
Cool. Well, Fish, as we said in the announcement, it was a scintillating conversation. Very enjoyable. Thank you so much. Um, Anybody else wants to jump up here, ask some questions? Feel free. People making fun of your monotone. Citrus Cyansis says he wants to come up. I've clicked yes. There you are.
I'm on my phone. I can't really hear on the speaker anymore, but I wanted to I don't know if you answered it really, but I wanted to hear about different ways you're trying to mitigate security risks with Docker and Docker.
What sort of I mean, there's two ways to run Docker and Docker. My devs know more about this than me, but the first way to do it is through privileged mode, which gives the person root access to all of to the whole GPU. And I know that miners would have an issue with that. So that's not the way that we implemented it. We implemented it through sysbox, I'm pretty sure, which is a way to still have Docker and Docker, but not have privilege mode or any access outside of the original container that you were in. With that in mind, is there still security concerns?
I mean, yeah, because privilege flag is like the one main thing that miners don't vibe with, but I mean, I didn't know if y'all had any other
No, we don't use
any
privilege
other
mode.
techniques or anything.
Yeah, we have a solution to use Docker and Docker without privilege mode.
Yeah, which is sysbox. Is that what you said?
Correct.
Cool. Very interesting.
Yeah, thanks for the
Well,
question.
yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm gonna go back to vibe coding. Great stuff, guys. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks for coming, Fish. Ciao.
Thanks.
See ya.